Hello and welcome to this Fane online event, which is a super fan online event with Cassandra Clare. My name is Anna James. I'm an arts journalist and the author of the Pages & Co series, and I am delighted to be chatting to Cassie once more about her brilliant Shadowhunter universe. We are specifically here to celebrate the newest in the last hours series, which is Chain of Iron, and this one is out now. But we're going to talk about the world building generally. We're going to talk about the new book. We're going to work on a spoilers for Chain of Gold, but no spoilers for the Chain of Iron basis, I think is the agreed setup. So there's your ample warning. I'm sure you all know all about Cassandra Clare and all the Shadowhunter books, so I am not going to tell you more about them, so we have more time to ask Cassandra herself all about it. So welcome, Cassie.
Hi, thanks for having me, and it's so good to see you again.
It's so nice to see you. The last time we saw each other was almost a year ago in a pre-pandemic time at the afternoon tea to celebrate Chain of Gold coming out.
Yes. Oh my
Which was
gosh, what a normal time that was. Yes, I remember we were we were in London. We had a lovely celebrating of Chain of Gold coming out tea. We had little branded tea bags and delicious scones. Yeah, that's actually the last time I traveled. That was my last trip.
It seems like a different time.
I know.
But I'm going to still, even virtually, to speak and celebrate the newest book. So to kick off, I think, could you give us a bit of a reminder of where we kind of leave the characters at the end of Chain of Gold, and what you can tell us without getting too into it about kind of where Chain of Iron picks up?
Well, we leave the characters at the end of Chain of Gold all in pretty precarious positions, either, emotionally or in some other way. So our heroine, Cordelia, has just very bravely ruined her own reputation by getting up in front of the Council of Shadowhunters and announcing and giving James, who recently burned down a house, and he had a good reason, an alibi by claiming that she spent the night with him. So James, realizing what this means for her, offers to marry her. So she's in love with him. He is in love with someone else, a girl called Grace Blackthorn. So we leave Cordelia in a place where she's marrying the guy that she loves, but she knows it's all the wrong reasons, and she's very worried about how it's going to turn out. And then we leave quite a few of the other characters in various kinds of limbo. Lucy, Cordelia's best friend, is in love with a boy named Jesse, but he is dead. Not as much of a problem for a Shadowhunter as it might be for a regular person, but still not ideal. So she is, maybe because Lucy can see ghosts and has special powers where the dead are concerned, she's teaming up with this mysterious Grace Blackthorn to maybe see what they can do about raising Jesse from the dead. And then there's Cordelia's poor brother Alistair, who is on the outs with the merry thieves, who are James and his three best friends, Matthew, Thomas, and Christopher. And this is all very tragic for Thomas and Alistair, who have feelings for each other, but also a very bad history together. And meanwhile, the demon Belial has been revealed to be James's and Lucy's grandfather. And while he has been defeated in book one, it seems likely he will be back.
Now, having read the new book, I think officially this is my favorite Shadowhunter series now. I am extremely invested. I love it. I'm interested, at what point in the kind of writing of the whole kind of chronicles did you kind of pinpoint that there was a story to be told about this generation?
It's interesting. And I didn't think about it initially. And I remember even when I was working, it was when I was unfortunately finished with Clockwork Princess, had already turned it in, and I had done this, at the request of my publisher, I'd created a family tree. And so, I put the family tree in with Clockwork Princess thinking, well, now it'd be nice for people to know what happened to the characters from Clockwork Princess and how they kind of connect to the characters in Mortal Instruments and the more modern books. And then I found myself looking at this, family tree and thinking about all the names on the family tree and what are they like, you know? And I decided to do a collection of short stories called The Bane Chronicles about Magnus Bane, who's one of my favorite characters, with my friends Maureen and Sarah. And so as we were working on that collection, we set two of the stories in the time period. We just thought it would be fun to kind of visit the kids, you know, like let's spend some time with this James, you know, who's on the family tree, and Lucy, and you know, Grace, these other characters. And and my thought in that book was to create this dynamic with James, because Dickens is one of my favorite writers. The Infernal Devices is based in part on Tale of Two Cities, and I was like, what if we did a kind of a fun little riff on Great Expectations? And you know, James is Pip, and he's in love with this, you know, kind of girl that he doesn't know very well, but that he's, you know, he's known for a long time, since he was a kid, but they've never had a very open, you know, she's a mysterious figure. He doesn't really, can he really know her? Just like, you know, does Pip ever really know Estella, or is she a sort of a symbol? And so having done that, unfortunately, that the idea of like, let's do a Shadowhunter, Great Expectations, like just caught my imagination. And so I started to think, you know, what about all these other characters? What are they like? And they just sort of, you know, came into my head pretty fully formed. And after that, there was no other option than to write the whole story about them.
When I was prepping for this, I was watching videos on fan theories, and there is a lot of interrogation of that family tree that goes on online. Where I was like, got deep into some YouTube wormhole about that family tree.
That's the problem with that kind of document, you know. It came up with it, and then I was like, look, it's not 100%. We don't know if the family tree is accurate. And now everyone's like, what parts of it are accurate? What parts of it are not accurate? What could be happening?
And you say, so when with the Great Expectations, and you kind of had the Pip Estella storyline, so that kind of that was always at the center of it. When did you know that Cordelia was going to kind of be the heart of this story? If I don't know, is that fair to say? I think she's the heart of it. She's my heart of it.
She is. Oh no, she absolutely is. It's interesting. Well, for one thing, if I recall, Cordelia's not on the family tree. And so I was like, well, thank God for Cordelia. And we don't know anything about her. And I can have a little bit more freedom in creating her character. Cordelia's not. Right. Cordelia always was in my mind the heroine, and part of it was I had a little bit more freedom with her because her parents are not already a beloved pairing from the Infernal Devices. And so that gives me a lot more freedom to create her as a character, and also her background. And to, you know, one of the interesting relationships in the book, I think, is her relationship with her brother Alistair. You know, they both have these sort of preconceptions about each other at the beginning of Chain of Gold. She learns a lot more about Alistair and why he sort of is the way he is. And he, you know, I think learns to stop treating her like a little girl, and kind of reckon with her being a powerful force on her own. And they have this interesting, you know, at first antagonistic, then kind of teaming up as siblings relationship that I really like. And I think Cordelia is the, you know, she absolutely is the heart of the book. I think I picked her because she stood a little bit outside that the already existing, you know, I certainly there's a story to be told in which James is more like Pip and Estella is the heroine, but I always liked Bertie. Yeah, I felt bad for her. She liked Pip, but Pip was obsessed with Estella. And so more than Estella, I always related to her because, like, I think a lot of us have a hard time relating to the beautiful, mysterious, closed off, what could she be thinking character. And Bertie's just very, like, human. We do, you know, understand her feelings and we sympathize with her and her unrequited love. And so that was something that I just found, you know, to me, sympathetic and kind of fun to delve into. And so Cordelia is really, she's in love with James from before even the book really starts, and she has to sort of reckon with the fact that he's in love with somebody else. And what kind of relationship are they developing given the weird circumstances and all of that. But I love Cordelia because she just really knows what she wants. She comes into the book really determined to save her father and fix the situation with her family, and she just never really wavers. She's like a bulldozer.
But that's why I love her as well. I think part of the reason I really love this series as well is obviously all your books do have quite large casts, but this really, obviously we have these people at the center, but there is a real ensemble feel to this series. And I really enjoyed that. And I guess how consciously, how much was that kind of a knock-on effect if you have these kids of these parents and you want to play with them all? And for you as a writer, how was it fun to kind of have a bigger ensemble to play with?
It's fun and also challenging, I would say, in the sense that, you have this big cast and they're all, have their own sort of arc of character and, where they start, where they end. I do think of it as an ensemble, there's no book without Matthew, there's no book without Anna, there's no book without Thomas, there's no book without Christopher blowing things up. And I think definitely, when I started, I knew it was going to have to be, an ensemble big cast because all these people were on the family tree and they all had to play some kind of a part. But it's fun. It can be challenging, especially in terms of, blocking big scenes where lots of people are there and, balancing out the dialogue and making sure, information is conveyed in the correct way. And that it's almost technical issues of who knows what when.
Right. Well, I was going to say this book in particular, there is a lot of secrets, different people know different things and are kind of doing different deals with different people. And that must have been a lot to keep track of.
It was. And, the theme, I would say the theme of this book is sort of secrets, are they destructive? What's the, what about, people keep secrets for all sorts of reasons, sometimes to protect other people, sometimes to protect themselves. And so what's the sort of end result of all of this secret keeping? But yes, it's often difficult to sit there and be like, okay, so, so-and-so knows about this thing, but so-and-so doesn't know about this thing, who knows about what, who knows? It's who knows who likes who, that kind of thing. It's complicated, but it's fun, but it's definitely you're keeping track.
Is there one of the kind of greater ensemble that you feel a particular fondness for, kind of one of the more not the core sort of characters, or if you were going to do a spin-off, is there a character that you're particularly drawn to that kind of is very present but doesn't necessarily have a central arc?
And I like all of them pretty much. I mean, maybe not like Tatiana, but Matthew, I think I really love Matthew. He's a lot of fun. He's one of those characters that I really like, who's kind of a classic of literature. He's sort of spinning down the drain in his own way pretty quickly, but he's dancing very fast to make sure that nobody notices. He's got a fairly serious drinking problem, but he covers it up quite well and is the life of the party. He's charming. Everyone loves him. He's so much fun. Cordelia thinks of him as the person she knows who has true freedom. And, he does, he loves the bohemian lifestyle. He doesn't care about the, mores of society, etc. And I love that kind of character, and the fact that he has this sort of, problem, as this dark secret of the Mr. Rochester type is fun. So I would love to, I think a spin-off story about Matthew would be really fun to do.
Yeah. Now, as I said, we're not going to do spoilers for the new book. So I don't want to, so I'm going to stick with things that have been very much officially revealed on the blurb. And we talked a bit about Cordelia. And one thing that's been very kind of present in talking about the book in advance, of course, is her relationship with Cortana, her sword. And it says on the back of the book, I promise, that she obviously that relationship gets complicated. So what can you tell us about that?
That's really interesting because there's a aspect of Cortana that's sort of gone into in the last hours that is almost like Mjolnir, like it has to choose you. You have to be worthy to be able to bear this blade. Which is a long-standing, obviously, like folkloric tradition. Like only Arthur can pull the sword from the stone, only Thor can wield the hammer, and there's a famous Welsh sword that I cannot pronounce the name of, but it looks like a Dirnwyn.
Okay.
It has engraved folklore. It has engraved on the hilt of draw Durnman. Only the person who was worthy of the sword can draw it. So we know that this is a legend that comes from all over, and that's always kind of fun to play with the resonance of that kind of mythology. And so here we have seen, the sword choose Cordelia when she was younger, and she and the sword have kind of a symbiotic relationship. They seem to, be on the same wavelength. And then suddenly, in Chain of Iron, the sword begins to do this, what Cordelia believes is rejecting her. It burns her hands when she touches it. And so she's really upset. What could this mean? Why is the sword burning me when I touch it? And that, desire to fix the problem kind of leads her down a complicated road. She goes looking for someone who can help her. And in Shadowhunter world, when you go looking for somebody who can help you, sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not.
That was, yes. I don't trust myself to react to that, but yes. I want to ask you more about the historical research, and we're going to come back to this, but just thinking about Cordelia, one of the things I find really fascinating in the Shadowhunter books that are set in the past is, of course, kind of working in the way that contemporary gender roles kind of impact the Shadowhunter, all of them, and the girls in particular. And obviously, as you've said, Cordelia's reputation is the real driving force for a key plot point of that. And I'd love to kind of hear about how you kind of get that balance between the accuracy of what society was really like with the fact that the Shadowhunter community also obviously has its own rules and rhythms.
It is interesting. There is a bit of sort of trying to figure out the right balance, because obviously Cordelia is someone who, as part of the Shadowhunter community, is expected to, quote unquote, have a job. Her job is killing demons. And, women also are taught, to fight and to defend themselves against demons, and it is expected they will, be shadow hunters. Charlotte, who is a woman, is the consul, the most, powerful shadow hunter that there is. And so that is obviously something that would not have been reflected at all in the society of 1903. The women of the Shadowhunter world, they do vote, for instance, but I think that there's sort of an interesting difference. I mean, women's, rights and freedoms are often at the sort of spear point of change, right? And I think there's a really interesting thing with the Shadowhunters in being able to provide a sort of, the setting of 1903, and that a lot of their social mores and, are kind of, not where we would be at. The idea that Cordelia is a warrior clearly doesn't impact the idea that she is expected to remain virginal for her husband, and that her worth as a marriage partner is impacted. That like these things exist at the same time, and they can. Like that's totally that is the thing that has happened. So it is really interesting, because in some ways they have more freedom and more power than other women of the same, time period who are mundane. Shadowhunter women can own property, Shadowhunter women can vote, Shadowhunter women have jobs and salaries, but they are still expected to do more domestic tasks. They're expected to do the majority of child rearing. They're expected to, be good women and to keep their reputations clean. And I think that it's, to me, an interesting way to kind of explore that, because a lot of times when I read historical fiction, I get this, sense that the writer is looking at the problems of the past through a modern lens, right? The characters often seem to have a far more modern and our time approach to issues in the book that they wouldn't have the vocabulary for or likely think about that way. And so, in some ways, this gives me the opportunity to create a society within a society where I can have the characters kind of think about these things from a slightly more, from a viewpoint that is not specifically historical, because it's influenced by 1903, but isn't probably the way people would think in 1903, but there's a reason for it.
Right. And I am fascinated by the research that you have done in terms of the historical periods. I think partly, like, I did a history degree, plus I live in London. So like, I just love all the kind of old London stuff. And I do a lot of like getting Google up and seeing what's still there and what's changed. I know that you actually did some, when you were writing Infernal Devices, you actually did some like you walked around London and like looked for buildings that matched what you're looking for. I would love to just hear a bit more about that kind of process and experience.
I did that too for Last Hours. I mean, I love London. I lived in London with my parents when I was a kid. And, I lived in London for about 6 months when I was first writing Last Hours. I came back many times. That time that I was there in January and I saw you, I also took a bunch of days and did research, which is fun. There's a whole scene. There's a place called Mount Street Gardens, in London that's significant in the book. And I had a lot of fun because I had to stage a fight scene. And so I brought my friends and my mother, who's 77 years old. And I was like, you're here and we're going to run around, in circles, pretending like blocking out this fight scene and chasing each other. My mom was like, okay.
I love that.
It was funny. It was funny. My mother's very game, thankfully. And partly, I mean, I think it's important to know, how long would it take my character to get from here to here? Like, you just want the city to feel like a real place that has a real geography that exists. So, I picked Curzon Street as an important location because my grandfather lived there for many years. He was blacklisted during the McCarthy era, and he was a filmmaker. So he came to London and he made horror movies at Pinewood Studios. And he lived on Curzon Street. So I picked his house. Mount Street Gardens wound up being significant because I needed a place you could run to from Curzon Street in under 15 minutes. So we did like a bunch of sprints from Curzon Street to different areas. And it's just, I don't know, I really love it. Like as part of the research for the book, it just feels fun. And like I was looking, this is not a secret, I've talked about this many times. Matthew decides to move out of his house and get his own flat in a what's called a mansion flat, which to Americans sounds incredibly fancy. A mansion is like a massive house full of servants with a golf course and a tennis court and a pool. That's not what a mansion flat is. But I was looked all over, and I walked to a bunch of different places that had been sort of like mansion flats that rented flats to bachelors, in this time period. And I walked to, just tell me I'm pronouncing this right, Marylebone.
Do you know what? It's not one that I've ever really been. Marylebone is what I would say, but it's like I'm not 100% confident that that's right.
Okay, I'll say what you say, Marylebone. And I went there to kind of check out a couple different, potential flats. And there's one that just it's amazing. It looks like a melted pink wedding cake. And it's called, oh, good Lord, like I'd have to look it up. The Wimbley, it's got a hilarious name, like Wimbley Manors. And I just looked at it and I was like, yes, of course, this is where Matthew would live, because why would he not want to live in the one that looks like a melted pink wedding cake? You have to actually, I think, be there to see this stuff, It really, there's something about like being on the ground. You see how things feel, how they smell, the sense of being there. And, the sound of the place, like I feel like it's stuff that's very hard. And now, of course, that we're kind of all stuck at home. All of my research has been virtual, and I really do miss the ability to be on the ground and to do that research by being there in person.
You've mentioned places that you knew you needed sort of somewhere that was this running different distance, and you needed somewhere that Matthew would go and live. When you were kind of exploring and looking around, did you stumble across any places that you saw that you didn't kind of know you were looking for, and you just saw something that sparked your imagination and you worked in without knowing that you needed it?
Oh yeah, all the time. There's a place well, I love the area around Borough Market, like just the whole area. I don't know why. I just do.
It's lovely.
And it's fun. It's lovely. I love Borough Market, and I like just sort of walking around there. And I was there. I was walking down a small street, and I found a place called the Crossbones Graveyard. And it is a place where it's just it's a fence now, but it's covered in flowers and notes. And beyond it, you can kind of see this small cemetery, and there's a plaque there now that says this is where, unbaptized babies, suicides, and prostitutes were buried. And it is a place of the unquiet dead. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I've never heard of it. Never would have thought of, I never would have researched into something like this, but now that it exists, I've got to work it into the book. Mm-hmm. So definitely, you can find a place and be like, oh yeah, this place is definitely going to be in my book. I really want to be able to describe it. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I know that when you were thinking about Infernal Devices, you said that you read almost exclusively, I think, books set in that era. Did you do a similar thing for The Last Hours and the Edwardian period?
I did 5 or 6 months of just reading stuff that was written in the Edwardian era or about the Edwardian era. I let myself read, stuff that modern writers wrote about that time period. So MC Beaton has a great Edwardian era mystery series that I read that was really fun. And, I read a lot of, I could probably pull up my Kindle. The problem thing is that I would end up buying anything that was set in the Edwardian period. So some of it more useful than others. But, all of it, I think often, you get really interesting details out of things that would surprise you. I remember researching for Infernal Devices, how Tessa would get from New York to London, via boat in the Victorian period. And I read a diary of a woman who had crossed over on the boat. And there's just this amazing description of what it was like for this boat, in the middle of the night to navigate this ice field, of massive icebergs and under the northern lights. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. It's just not a thing I would have thought of, but she's described it and makes me think about, what that means. It's fun too, just to read, the kind of, the travelogues and the diaries of the time period. And there's a lot of little details. There's a whole, I'm trying not to be spoilery, but there's a bunch of stuff about house decoration in this book. I apologize in advance. And so it's just, I did a huge amount of reading of just like the Edwardian house. How do you set it up? And like, I always say research is again, like an iceberg. You only see 10% of the research that you do on the page, but the rest of it is under there sort of supporting it all. So I learned everything about Edwardian kitchens and how often when you would get coal and how you would get these various things and how you kept things cold and what rooms were usually on what floor. And, and there's I don't think that there's that much of it in the book, but it was really useful to know, actually, just because of the particular nature of this book. And I don't know, I don't want to go into it too much, but you will learn something about Edwardian houses. And the clothes. The clothes are so much fun.
I love how much detail you give us. I love reading detail. I love reading details about houses and clothes. So I love all of that.
I know, I did too.
Yeah. Speaking of settings, The Last Hours has potentially one of my favorite settings from across the Shadowhunter kind of world, which is the Hell Ruel. And I would love to hear a bit more about how you kind of created that, if you pulled from any real life kind of salons, and a little bit what you can kind of tell us about it, because it's for people who love it as well. It does feature more. I don't think that's too spoiler to say. It does feature more in this book.
I don't think it's spoiler to know that we go back to the Hell Ruel. If you have like a place that's that fun, you want to go back to. Yeah. And the Hell Ruel serves as a great sort of meeting point in the books, and it's a place where you can get information. And if you're looking for someone, it's good. You might be able to track them down there, because everybody kind of passes by the Hell Ruel at some point or another. I mean, the Hell Ruel is part fantasy, obviously. It is run by Downworlders. It is, there's magic always going on inside. But it is based on real literary salons. I think it's said in the first book, but Ruelle was a sort of slangy term for a literary salon in Paris or in France, because Ruelle is the space between a woman's bed and the wall. And according to the French, this is apparently a space where a lot of exciting stuff happens. Not sure that's totally true. But so they would sort of, and because salons are usually literary salons were almost always run by women, they would sort of be slangily termed the Ruelle. It's almost like saying, like, we're going to go over to, Madame de Maintenon's bedchamber and have some fun. But the fun was, artists, thinkers. They would just try to bring together a lot of interesting people. And so that's kind of the idea, the spirit of it, is that, like, Hypatia Vex, who's this very elegant warlock, runs this, runs the Hell Ruel, and she brings in, downworlder artists and, poets and werewolves who want to write sonnets about the moon, and, fairy acrobats and whatnot to amuse and delight. And I really just love that, because it's sort of it's by Downworlders for Downworlders. They're celebrating their own achievements and and amusing themselves. And the Shadowhunters are very much like coming in on their sufferance. And I like kind of centering the Downworlders in that way, giving them their space. And I based it in part on the existence of these literary salons. And also I did a lot of research into sort of because there are several characters who are LGBTQ plus in these books. And I did a lot of research into sort of queer spaces of that time period, and what gay and lesbian bars and clubs looked like in London and in Paris. Spoiler, it was not illegal to be gay in Paris, so they were a lot more open. But it was still really interesting, just sort of like, what does it look like when there's a space that's created for a marginalized group to celebrate themselves and to, be themselves and thrive in that space? What's the feeling of that space? What's it like? What was it like in the Edwardian period? How did it work? And so that actually was because I, wanted my characters to be able to go to those queer spaces, which is something that happens in Chain of Thorns. And also I felt like it was, as I was reading about those spaces, it really was helpful to sort of creating the Ruelle.
Which we have to, like, Anne, I think even if she didn't have the same name as me, I would be a huge fan of Anna in your books. But it just adds to the joy for me that she's also called Anna. And she is, again, it's, whenever we talk, I always just want to, I need another off-camera chat where we can just get into it. So I'm not going to be too spoilery, but Anna is very present in this book as well. We get to spend more time with her, which I loved. And, you talked about the importance of having the queer characters have their own stories and have proper love stories as well. Okay, I'm not going to get specific because we don't want to do any spoilers. But
I know it's so hard to do without, but still.
I should be better at this now, but the world keeps deepening. But there are several love scenes in this book, and I wanted to just ask you a bit about kind of writing sex scenes, I guess, and how you kind of, when you feel like it's important to show them on the page and when you don't, and kind of balancing writing? Because I mean, like, still you're published as YA, and kind of how you find the right like balance there.
I mean, because it's YA, you do keep an eye on the explicitness of what you're writing. But I think that, this is for teenagers, and they know people have sex. And, it's okay to be like, and these people, they had sex. There's a lot of sexy business, definitely, in Chain of Iron. And I think that for me, all of that stuff, as it sort of unfolds, tells us something about the relationship. There's, I too am trying not to be spoilery, but there's certainly there's a couple who jumps quickly into a very intense physical relationship. And that is, to me, significant. And it's significant for us to know, what's happening and what they're doing. And, what does this mean about this sexual relationship? Because it is part of a thing they are doing, which I would say is not addressing the major problem at the heart of the relationship that's actually preventing them from having a more, committed and serious relationship, which is this, and really, part of what the whole book is about is these pieces of last communication between people. But instead of having those conversations, they're having the sex. And so I feel like, it's important for us to know that, because otherwise, what are they doing? Like, it is a particular dynamic. There's another couple who's, oh man, how do we talk about this? Okay. There's another couple who have a relationship that really toggles between, intimate and hostile. And so obviously what they do physically, it opens them up to immense vulnerability. And so I think it's important for us to know that. There's, everything that anything that happens with James and Cordelia, physically is significant, because, what does it mean to have a fake engagement, that requires these gestures of intimacy in public, as you play this part? And what does it then mean when you are in private? You have become accustomed to this kind of intimacy. And yet you're not supposed to perform it in private, because you're supposed to be both conscious that this is all a lie, but that is not how people really are, not how things actually turn out. And in many ways, the truths of Cordelia and James's relationship are communicated physically, because they can't communicate them verbally. So I guess I would just say, I think of all of that stuff as, really significant part of character and relationship development. Not really, like, it's interesting. Like, and I think that, so far, mostly my readers are very good at picking up on that stuff. They're like, oh, I see that in this scene, there's like, it's sometimes it's little gestures or bigger gestures, but I see in this scene, so-and-so put their hand on so-and-so, and then they, pulled it back quickly. What does that mean?
And it's interesting to talk about like the small little bits of relationships, because one of the things, when we had the afternoon tea, you were talking about the kind of work that you put into creating these really believable relationships that readers can really invest in, and I found that fascinating. And you talk very consciously about how much work you do in that, and I was, what can you kind of tell us a bit more about that work and how much effort you put into these relationships, which I am very invested.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I pick relationship dynamics that interest me, that I know that this is something that I want to talk about, think about, explore. We're talking about, with Cordelia and James, have we not all felt unrequited love at some point or another? For me, there's a lot of power in the feelings that Cordelia has, and the ways in which she copes with them. And then there's also Matthew, who constantly falls in love with people he cannot have, which I find, just very interesting. And also just part of the root of his personality. Matthew is someone who did something pretty bad, not on purpose, but still pretty bad result. And he is still angry at himself about that, and therefore does not, fundamentally believe, that he is deserving of requited love. And I just feel like the ways the characters interact with romance, tells you a lot about them, and also just sort of, what do we read for, if not, to quote a person I cannot remember, to know that we are not alone, and to
Mm.
know that there is a wide sort of world out there of different kinds of relationships that people have and different ways that they interact. So when I'm sort of thinking about, relationships and what interests them about, to me, with Lucy and Jesse, it's not Jesse is dead. That's not really the thing. It's certainly that is a piece of business that creates a problem for them. But there's also their personalities, how their personalities mesh, how the sort of stressor that is the fact that he is dead creates these significant moments in their relationship, and what it means about both of them, and how I think, one of the important things that we look for is, how does each character change the other character? How does, Thomas make Alistair more generous? How does, Ariadne force Anna to confront things about emotions that she has not been wanting to confront? How does, Cordelia's bravery affect James in terms of his sort of fight to reclaim his own emotional truth? And I think all of that is the stuff that, to me, is the most interesting, stuff, like really the heart of a book. And, the fact that it's taking place in a world full of demons and goblins and mighty sword wielding ladies is just a plus.
Yes. Also, I think you should use "mighty sword wielding ladies" as the tagline for this series, because that's amazing.
Now that's my band. Yeah. Mighty sword wielding ladies. We've been together for a long time.
And linked to, I think, a lot of this is probably, you've kind of touched on a lot of this stuff, because when I was reading, not just the new, but I was reading Infernal Devices just before this, and then reading these books, and I think I was struck by how much love triangles as a concept has kind of become a thing that people use almost to dismiss this genre, like YA essentially. And it just struck me about how, but when they're done well, they're just so good, and they can tell you such interesting things about characters. And I'd love to kind of, it almost feels like it's become it's treated as like a trope and a cliche that can never be done well. Whereas obviously there's a lot of evidence that shows that that's not true. How do you feel about those kind of ways that things in YA are treated, and how you like to explore them to show that there's still story and character there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I do find it annoying that it's dismissed, that love triangles are dismissed, and that it's part and parcel of the way that YA is dismissed. That it's, there's YA is sort of dismissed on one level as, being about romance, as if that was a bad thing, which is also not true. I mean, I think there's no more, romance than there is in any other genre, really. But, and then it's also dismissed as, this love triangle thing, I think, because a lot of people became aware of YA because of Twilight and then the Hunger Games, and they do both have love triangles in them. And, they're certainly a testament to how effective love triangles are and how much they draw people in. But, there's always people sort of lined up to want to dismiss YA and want to dismiss the things that exist at the core of YA, and who want to dismiss, sort of the things that, and I know, and my readership is varied, but certainly there's a lot of people lining up to want to dismiss the things that women, and especially teenage girls, like to read. And I do find that frustrating and annoying. And, I often, they'll say, oh, well, but love triangles are this or that. And I'm like, did you like Pride and Prejudice? It has a love triangle in it, like The Great Gatsby's got a love triangle in it. There's a lot of love triangles in this world. And in literature that you're probably not thinking about because you've got an idea in your head of what love triangle means to you. And it's not always the same thing. And, I think there's a difference between, for one thing, your classic love triangle, and also triangulating a relationship in which there is another person who comes in and complicates things. But then there's also just sort of even the classic love triangle, I feel like, gives you so much opportunity sort of for character development and revealing things about those characters, and can really sort of deepen your knowledge of who they are. And also, I mean, one of my favorite things to write was the love triangle with Will and Tessa and Jem in the Infernal Devices. And it ended in this way in which people were like, how is this the ending? Like, I think it was really startling that they did not expect it to end in that manner. But I think that it is an indicator of the ways in which you can always you can always use the love triangle, like any trope, to surprise people and to interrogate even the concept of what is a love triangle and what does it mean. So I'm very defensive of adverbs, I'm very defensive of the love triangle.
I want to go back because you touched a little bit, obviously, on the way that the pandemic has impacted the way that you've researched and written. So, at what point in the kind of process did it really hit? How far through Chain of Iron were you? And presumably you're on to writing Chain of Thorns now. How is it where did it hit, and how has it impacted, as you've mentioned the research, but has it impacted you in other ways in terms of how you approach the stories?
I mean, yeah, I think that that's been impactful on multiple levels. I think that one of the interesting things is that there is a plague in Chain of Gold, and an actual quarantine. And I was like, oh my God, why? Obviously I had no idea that a pandemic was coming, but what it meant was that I had read dozens of books about plagues and pandemics throughout history. And so when the pandemic actually hit, I was like, oh my God, I know way too much. This is terrible. Why did I do all that research? This is awful.
No, too much.
And, I know. I was like, I really wish I knew less. And I mean, and it was weird having, just having given so much thought to these things and then having to give thought to them in real life. But also like, I mean, I came back from I was on tour actually in March, and then sort of the tour got shut down early and I came home and, immediately went, into quarantine. And so, and was into writing Chain of Iron. And I do wonder if you can see anything in Chain of Iron about my mindset, or about, what it was like about writing that book during a pandemic and editing it during the pandemic, which mostly for me, was a lot about being alone. I think that the pandemic put stress on everybody in different ways. And, for me and for my work, that I've talked about this a lot, I usually work with my friends, with my assistant, and to be without them and to be, just kind of every day sitting alone at the kitchen table working was a very strange experience. And I do think that there are sort of themes of disconnection in Chain of Iron that you can kind of see, like the feeling of people being disconnected from other people, not quite able to quite connect with them in the right way, that, may reflect the feeling of great loneliness. I think that certainly afflicts everybody during the pandemic. And I think for creative people can be really hard to work through.
Mm-hmm. And then what stage, and we're going to get onto very shaky foundations as we start to talk about what happens next. What stage are you at with the next book?
Still in the beginning of the next book. It's kind of interesting because I'm writing my first adult book, which is called Swordcatcher. So I've been working on Swordcatcher, and yeah, it's been really fun. So I'm sort of trading off between the two of them. So it's not like I've done this. I mean, hey, I've done this before, like my readers know I'll often put out 2 books a year, and that always means you're trading off between 2 books. And I wrote a series called Magisterium with Holly Black. So I've certainly done the switching off between books, but I would say, I'm in the first third of Chain of Thorns. And also I've done the outline. I always do like a giant outline of, what happens. And so I know what happens. And then I'm sort of switching back and forth from Swordcatcher to Chain of Thorns. So that's going to be interesting.
Okay.
I do know what happens in it.
Yeah. I am obviously not going to ask you to tell us really anything, because that would involve spoilers for that as well as this one. But can you give us maybe like a word or two that kind of, we've talked about like how with Chain of Gold, there's lots of stuff to do with secrets and perhaps loneliness. So they're like word clues you can give us for Chain of Thorns?
Okay, let me think. Paris. Kidnapping.
Ooh.
Let's see. Trying to think of things that are not going to spoil anything for anybody. Cornwall. Let's see. Gotta have your party at which a terrible thing happens.
Ooh, love
I love the party. I love the, I know. Full, I love a party where a terrible thing happens. Like my favorite. Let's see. What else? Death. Yeah, it's always somebody's gonna die. And okay, let me think. Invention, science, death, parties, secrets being revealed. A new shadow hunter arrives in London, and right, kidnapping.
Okay, I'm sold.
All right, I think that's all I can say.
Honestly, that was more than I thought we were gonna get, so I'm happy. Right, to round off, I have got some Shadowhunter would you rather questions for you.
Oh my god, okay.
Which are non-spoilery, but I did have lots of fun. Well, yes, no, they're not spoiler, obviously. But okay, so number one, would you rather have an evening at the Hell Ruel or at the Shadow Market?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Oh man, I would love to go to both of them, but I'm going to say Shadow Market because I really like markets. I feel like, when I go to like a new country and I really want to know like what's that country like, I'll go to like the big public market. And I feel like I could get some really good stuff at the Shadow Market. Like some really cool items.
Yeah. Okay. Number two, would you rather have a battle of wits with Matthew or Anna?
Oh no. Oh my God. Probably Matthew. I love you, Matthew, and you're very witty, but I feel like Anna could totally destroy me if she felt like it. She's very smart. She's like very incisive, and like if she felt like really taking you down with her wit, she totally could. Matthew would be more likely to take pity on me.
Yeah, probably Matthew.
He's got a kind
of. Would you rather? I mean, this is obviously like you obviously do both of these things, but would you rather write a sex scene or a death scene?
Ooh, I'd rather write the sex scene. I mean, I've written a lot of death scenes and they're always hard and they're sort of traumatic and, unless it's a villain or something, you feel sad about it. Whereas for me, the sex scenes are they're complicated because they're about everybody's feelings, have to be calibrated every moment. There's also a lot of blocking that goes on in sex scenes. I'm like, people do not appreciate the sheer level of like, where's everybody's hands? Where's their feet? It's complicated.
You just have to think about when you write middle grade. Like I never have to worry about that.
But how many times have we come across the mysterious appearance of Octopus Man in a romance novel in which it's like, with his left hand, he caressed her hair, while with his right hand, he undid her corset, while with his left hand, he caressed her breasts. And you're like, how many hands does this guy have? Like, Squid Man strikes again.
Quite well. Speaking of squid, I was to say, would you rather battle Leviathan or Belial?
Leviathan's got a lot of tentacles. It's kind of gross, but I think I'd still rather battle him than Belial because I feel like Belial wants to get into your head and really mess with you, whereas Leviathan mostly just wants to wave tentacles around.
Yeah, and you wouldn't risk getting distracted by, Belial can be quite handsome, and I feel like I would get distracted by that, whereas Leviathan is not sexy ever.
You'd just be like, Right, it's like getting in a you're right, you're right, that's true, that's true, and we know that, we might be likely to underestimate Belial because he seems like a very handsome and gentleman, whereas yeah, well, whereas Leviathan is just a huge tentacled monster. You definitely know that you're in trouble.
Yeah. Would you rather be parabatai with Cordelia or Lucy?
Oh, that one's so difficult. I love them both. I would probably rather be parabatai with. Oh man, I'm gonna say Cordelia. I love Lucy. Cordelia's such a badass. I feel like I am not at all a badass, and that I have very bad at swinging swords and things like that. And so I would try to be amusing and distracting for Cordelia. Like Lucy writes her a whole book, and the hopes that Cordelia would protect me in dangerous situations.
Yeah, that's a smart choice, I think. Right, we have got a couple more. Would you rather make a bargain with Malcolm Fade or Hypatia Vex?
I think Hypatia. I mean, and that's only because I know what I know about Malcolm from the Dark Artifices.
Okay.
He eventually becomes not so nice a guy, whereas Hypatia remains a pretty. I think she does what she says she's going to do.
Okay. Would you rather see a fan theory go viral that is completely wrong or unnervingly right?
Wrong. Unnervingly right is like, oh no, now what? Whereas wrong, I'm like, I love that theory. What a great theory. I mean, and many a fan theory that is completely wrong has gone completely viral. So I'm used to it.
That was the easiest one so far. Right, two more. Would you rather be able to shapeshift or command the dead?
Ooh, shapeshift. The dead freak me out. I don't want to spend more time with them than I absolutely have to. Whereas shapeshifting would allow me to do all sorts of cool things. I could go anywhere, I could just have to shapeshift into somebody who has like access,
Yeah.
I mean,
that's true.
I think I would have to be the shapeshifting.
Okay. And the last one is, would you rather be a shadow hunter alongside Tessa, Will, and Jem, or alongside Cordelia, James, and Lucy?
Oh, I can't decide. That's so hard. I love them all. I love Tessa, Will, and Jem. Let's see, Cordelia, Lucy, and James. Man, I'm gonna say I'm gonna get in trouble whatever I say, but I'm gonna say at the moment Cordelia, James, and Lucy, just because I've been spending so much time with them mentally, and I feel like, I love Will and Jem and Tessa. I'm always happy to visit and revisit with them. But I think that right now I'm just sort of in this space with Cordelia and James and Lucy, and I'm spending all my time thinking about what are they thinking about and what, their concerns are and how things will turn out for them. And so I would love to, spend time with them since there's so much on my mind. And I'd like to read The Beautiful Cordelia. I mean, the whole book. I'm kind of curious because I only ever dip in and out of The Beautiful Cordelia at the big, like action moments. And I'm like, what's happening in the rest of this book?
And of course, I suppose if you pick Cordelia, James, and Lucy, you kind of get to pick both because Will and Tessa are around. So I guess you kind of get to be shadow hunters with all of them. So
oh yeah,
right.
I can hang out with them. As adults, that would be fun as well.
Yeah. Right, that is all we have time for. So just to note that the event will be available on demand for 7 days after this initial broadcast. Thank you so much to Fane Productions and to Walker Books. Thank you to everyone who has joined in and watched. And above all, a huge thank you to Cassandra Clare, and a huge congratulations on the publication of Chain of Iron.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.